Hi there, welcome to the Schwowin's Nest. My name is Sandra. Here are 17 of my favorite Christmas DIYs. I hope you enjoy them. This next project is just using a bunch of bits and pieces left over from different projects. I'm using my miter shears just to cut this little stand down a little bit shorter. Now I'm going to drill a hole down in the center of each of these 4 wooden discs. I'm doing 2 at a time. That just helps me to get them lined up really nicely. You've got to use a little bit of pressure, and of course with my hand not being that great, it does take me a little bit of force to get them drilled through. I'm doing the hole the size of the dowel that you see laying here. I also drilled a small hole into the top of the pedestal, and that's where I'm going to be inserting the little dowel with some hot glue, and I'm going to hold it till the hot glue dries just to keep everything nice and straight. Grabbing the largest wood slice first, I'm going to push it down until it hits the pedestal, adding some hot glue to keep it firmly in place. I'm going to continue this process with the rest of the discs, working my way from the largest to the smallest. I'm also going to leave a couple of inches in between, and I'm going to put a dab of hot glue on the dowel and hold it in place until the glue dries, and that will ensure that my wood slice doesn't fall down. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I'd love it if you could hit that subscribe button for me too. Now I'm using some of these pine picks that were left over from last year. I did purchase them on Amazon, and if they're still available, I'll put them down in my description box. I also have another type of pine pick that is still available in my description box as well. I'm just going to be adding some hot glue to the stem and gluing them laying flat down right on top of the wood slice. I'm going to do 4 on the bottom 2 wood slices and then 3 on the top 2 wood slices. Once I started getting closer to the top, I did have to trim off that wire pick stem just so it wouldn't stick out on the other side. From this top view, you can see how I was laying them out, and then I made a mistake. Don't cut the dowel too short. I thought I was going to be just putting a couple of branches on there, and I should have left the dowel because I'm going to be adding a little star at the end. So I ended up having to glue a piece of dowel back onto it. Anyway, I'm going to take 2 of these leftover stems. I think they're just the last 2 I have left, and I'm going to glue them standing straight up to form the top of the Christmas tree. The wood star that I added to the top of the tree is one of the cutouts that are available at the Dollar Tree, and I did have to glue the little dowel back into the center. You can see here what it looks like. I added some faux snow just using some white paint to the tips of the needles and a little bit on the wood slices that were peeking out, and I think this turned out absolutely gorgeous. This last project that I have for you today is making 2 of these little signs. These are some old tongue and groove boards that came off an old shed at our cottage that were painted this dark hunter green, and I thought these would be really cute little vintage signs. I'm just sanding off some of the loose paint, and then I'm going to just wipe it down with a rag. For the first sign, I'm going to use this little truck ornament cutout that also came from the Dollar Tree. I'm going to paint the base of the truck itself red. Of course, the tires will be black, and the little circle inside the tires will be white. You can see here that I painted the Christmas tree on the back of the truck green, but you can hardly see it. So I did end up just using my snips and I just cut that part off. I went to my Cricut and I just cut out Farm Fresh Christmas trees, and now I'm just going to apply those letters to the sign. So you can see here that on my truck, I've already taken off the Christmas tree. What I'm doing now is just using two little pieces of popsicle sticks to make little squares so I can raise up the truck when I glue it onto the sign. I just want it to be a little bit higher away from the flatness because I'm going to be adding some little mini bottle brush trees. I glued the little popsicle sticks to the back of the truck, and now I'm going to just hot glue the truck right onto the sign. These are the little mini trees that you can get from Crafter's Square at the Dollar Tree. I'm going to take 3 of them, remove the little bases at the bottom, and then glue them to the back of my truck. With the second sign, I'm going to be using these Christmas tree ornaments from the Dollar Tree, also Crafter's Square, and I'm going to remove the stars from 2 of them and leave the third one intact. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so YouTube will let you know every time I upload a new video. For these trees, I decided just to give them a stain. I'm using burnt umber acrylic paint that's watered down a little bit, and I'm just going to go over the top side of them, just going in the direction of the wood grain so it looks like real wood stain on here. On the tree with the star, I'm going to paint the background of it white. I want it to look kind of like a snowy, glittery star. So once this paint is dry, I'll be adding some Mod Podge and some Epsom salts just to give it a little bit of sparkle. Before I put anything on the signs, I did go over them with my dry brushing, just with a little bit of the white paint, kind of just to give it more of a snowy look, but also to add to the distressing because adding the white to the green really brought out all of the cracks in the paint. Using hot glue, I'm going to glue on the 2 wood trees first that don't have stars, just one on either side of the sign with their bottom branches sticking out just a wee bit. I'm going to glue the tree with the star onto the other 2 wood trees, and I'm going to raise it up just a little bit more so it's a little taller than the other 2 trees. With my Cricut, I added the words pine, spruce, and fir to the top, and I think these both turned out really cute. For this project, I'm going to start out by just using my Easy Press to iron the fabrics and make them nice and crease free. You can also just do this with a regular iron. I am also using a product today called HeatnBond Light. I've had this roll for a really long time. It has a smooth side and it has a rough side. The rough side is where the adhesive is. So what I'm going to be doing is cutting a piece of the HeatnBond Light to fit the size of my piece of fabric. I'll be putting the rough side of the HeatnBond onto the back side of my fabric. And that's when I'm going to be using my Easy Press. Again, you can use a regular iron for this. And I'm going to be ironing it on to make sure that the adhesive bonds to the fabric. Check a little piece of your fabric as you're going to make sure that the adhesive is bonding to the fabric. The backside of the fabric will show up a little bit shiny. So just make sure that you let it cool and don't burn your hands because it does get really hot with the fabric being ironed. Now that I have both pieces of fabric with the adhesive bond on them, I'm going to go ahead and work on my designs. I went to my Cricut Joy and just using some cardstock, I cut out some Christmas tree shapes. I'm going to use the stencil portion of it, as you see me doing here, just to outline the tree shapes. You can also use the cutout portion of the tree, which I will be doing in a few minutes. But if you don't have a Cricut, you know what? These are really easy shapes that you can just cut out with your scissors or a craft knife and create your own paper stencils. I've got 3 different types of trees that I'm going to use, and I'm also then going to do them on both types of fabric. So I've got at least 2 to 3 Christmas trees in each fabric style. Here are all the different trees. I'm just using my rotary cutter now just to help me cut out the individual trees. And then I'll be using my small detailing scissors to get into all of the little nooks and crannies. One thing to remember is if you are using a patterned fabric like this one, make sure to have all of your stripes going in the same direction. Otherwise, it might look a little wonky. Once you're ready to put your material on your project, you'll peel off the paper backing and you can see that there's a bit of a shine, which tells me that the adhesive is on there and ready to go. I've decided to use this piece of board to make my sign with my trees, and I'm putting a piece of Teflon paper on top because I don't want to burn my wood and I don't want to burn the fabric either. I'm putting it on at 275 degrees and I'm leaving it for about 45 to 60 seconds to make sure that the heat bond adheres properly to the wood. For the first couple of trees, I had to figure out how long I needed to leave it on, and I found the 45 seconds worked fairly good. I'm just double checking here to make sure that everything is stuck on properly. And then I'm just going to continue adding my trees. Here's what my sign looks like so far, and I am loving it. I went over to my Cricut and I cut out the words Merry Christmas, and I will have this linked in my website as a free printable along with the shapes of these trees. I'm just going to add on this decal and then I'm totally finished with this project. Today I'm making two Dollar Tree DIYs for you. This is a Canada sign that you can see here, and I just wanted to take all of that glitter and paper off on the top. Now this is an arduous procedure. It takes a long time and you have to be patient, but just using the Dollar Tree scraper, I was able to just pull it off and reveal a beautiful board underneath. Since I'm not going to be using the two hanging holes, I'm taking some of my spackle and I'm going to fill that in, let it dry, and then sand it down. Next, I'm going to give it 2 coats of DIY chalk paint in white, and this is just a latex white paint that's had some baby powder added to it. If you want the full recipe, it is down in my description box on each of my videos. If you have any questions about it, let me know in the comments. I've turned the sign sideways because that's how I'm going to use it, and I took my ruler and a pencil and I divided the boards so you can see them better. And now I'm just taking some black chalk paint. Again, it's a DIY with just an acrylic paint that's black and adding some baby powder to it. And I'm just going to do some dry brushing. I start always with a really light touch, and then at some point throughout I usually get a dark spot, and then there's the dark spot, and then that kind of tells me that I need to go over some of the other boards and make it look a little bit more uniform. I tried something a little different this time when I was doing my dry brushing to add some of the darker spots in, and you can see that I've got my brush just kind of turned on its side and I'm just stroking with the wood grain to give it a little bit more depth and character. I'm using this bowl that I have in my craft room, and I'm just using it as a template to create a circle so I can make sure that when I'm gluing this wreath together, it's not going to go haywire. So I'm going to be making a mini pine cone wreath, and I've got 2 types of these mini pine cones from the Dollar Tree. They have a bag that is some frosted ones and they have some that are plain. I'm going to be doing a mix of pine cones throughout this wreath, and all I'm doing is hot gluing them in one direction all the way around. So I'll start at the top and then kind of stagger them to the side and just mix up the shades and the sizes until I get a look that I like. Here's how the wreath is looking. I think it's coming together really nicely, and I'm so glad I did that pencil circle line because it definitely is keeping me on track and I'm not ending up with an oval or a square or some other wonky shape. Okay, so here's what I'm famous for. Doing a project, turning my camera off to give the camera a break or maybe charge up my battery, and then forgetting to turn the camera back on when I continue my craft. This is what happened with these little red pip berries that you see in the top left-hand corner. I cut them apart and put a couple here and there all the way through. I grouped them in some singles and some double little pips, and I think it turned out really pretty. What I'm doing here now is just adding some Boxwood greenery. I thought it needed something to brighten it up, and as soon as I kind of laid some of these leaves against it, I thought, wow, it's really making a big difference. Even though I want it to be rustic and farmhouse, that little pop of greenery just makes all the difference in the world. So I'm just going to take 2 of the little leaves and then use some hot glue and put them around and get them in a place where I like them. I'm just going to be doing the bottom portion of the wreath. I don't want to go all the way around with the greenery because then it starts to look a little cheap. I also added some of the leaves down at the bottom of the wreath, and now I'm working with these pip berries. There's a little fabric leaf that I'm just taking off here, and then I'm going to trim it down and figure out where I want to put it. I'm adding another bunch of these little pip berries down at the bottom, and then I'm going to also add a few other leaves. Here you can see that I pulled out the leaves that I had on the inside of the wreath. I decided I didn't like them, but I added a few more of the leaves down at the bottom. To hang the wreath, I'm just going to use some twine and I'm going to double it up and then just hot glue it on the back. And here's how this cutie turned out. My first project is using these wood planks that you can get from the Dollar Tree. There's 6 in a pack. You can get square ones and you can get these rectangular ones. I'm also going to be using some of these coffee stir sticks to create a pallet sign. I'm going to glue about 5 of the stir sticks across the back of the project to hold the planks in place. Once I've got this completed, I'm going to give it a couple of coats of linen white chalk paint. Next, I'm going to take these little wood cutout ornaments and I'm going to just slice off that star on the top because although these are Christmas trees, I just want them to be regular pine trees. So it's just really simple to score those off with my utility knife. Then I'm going to stain them with a mixture of burnt umber and black and a little bit of water. To get a nice arc shape for the words I want to put on, I took a piece of black cardstock, I folded it in half, and then just cut out an arc. And when I folded it open again, I had a full-size arc, and this is going to allow me to put the letters the way I want them to be. I'm going to just pencil in Christmas tree at the top. Normally, I'd be using my Craft Smart paint pen in black, but I didn't have that right now because it's run dry. And I didn't have a chance to go out and get some more. So I'm just going to use this permanent marker and trace out my letters. I'm going to put the word farm in larger letters right underneath in the center. And you can see here that I have now switched out to just a regular Sharpie marker because I was really struggling trying to find one that would not dry up because of the chalk paint. I do find that using regular markers on top of chalk paint tend to dry out really quickly. I don't know if it's because of the texture of the paint, because it's a really matte finish, but all of the tips end up getting clogged with paint and then I don't have any ink coming out. So that's a frustration for me. That is why I have always used my Craft Smart paint pens because they don't fail me. I just did my own little take on different types of fonts, added some little edges that would be sticking out, and now I'm taking a fine point marker and drawing out a shadow line. I didn't want to use hot glue on these little trees because they have little cutout circles in them, and I didn't want the hot glue to seep through, so I'm going to use my medium thickness Starbond glue. I've been using Starbond glues for a little bit now. I got a box of them sent to me from the Starbond company, and I really like their glues. They have a different assortment. I think I got about 6 in the box. This medium thickness glue is a nice one because it has a little bit of working time, but you don't need a lot. You can see that I only put a few little dots on it, and it's going to stick down really nicely. Takes about a minute or so for it to fully dry. This also comes with a spray accelerator, so if you need something to dry lickety-split, you can go ahead and put that glue on, spray the other side of the project, and then put the two pieces together and it will be an instant hold. I'm using a super fine tip marker to write the words pine, spruce, and fir on the bottom of the Christmas trees. This is just a dollar store fine point marker, and I found this in the office supply section. It works really, really well. I'm using my almost empty Craft Smart paint pen and my ruler to draw an arrow down at the bottom of the sign. I ended up having to switch over to the fine tip marker just to complete the outline of the arrow, and then I was going to just fill it in with black. And finally, I'm just going to take my chippy brush with some black paint. I'm going to distress it just by dry brushing across and making sure I do a little bit of extra along the edges. I want this sign to be freestanding, so I've taken some of these blocks that you can get at the Dollar Tree in their Crafter's Square, and again I'm taking my watered down burnt umber and black stain or acrylic paint stain, whatever you want to call it, a wash maybe, and I'm going to go ahead and stain about 8 of these. I'm going to need 4 for the bottom, and then I want to embellish the top with 2 of them as well. I'm using hot glue to attach the cubes, and I'm making sure that the cube sticks out a little bit on the side and at the top. So I'm really only gluing on maybe about half of the cube onto the pallet. To finish off the sign, because it will be standing up, I'm going to paint the back with just some acrylic white paint, and that will just finish it off and give it more of a professional look. My second project is super easy. I'm using this reindeer that I have from Dollarama from last year and this Dollar Tree Buffalo Check bag. I'm going to cut out a piece and make sure that I cut right along the edges there on the line to make sure I get a nice straight edge. I'm going to glue the bag onto the body of the reindeer, and I decided to try a different glue application. I'm just going to be using a glue stick. I didn't want to use hot glue because that ends up leaving it bubbly and bumpy, and my experience with Mod Podge and this plastic paper is not that great. You get a lot of bubbles with it. So I'm just going to put a generous amount of the glue stick on and cross my fingers to see if it works. It's going on really well and seems to be sticking. I do have to add some glue to a few spots where I missed originally, but I'm not getting any bubbles, so I'm really impressed with the glue stick. Using a really sharp craft knife, I'm going to cut around the body of the reindeer so I can remove the excess bag. So far, this project's turning out pretty good. I did have to add a little bit of extra glue, as I said earlier, just around the edges to make sure that they would stick properly. I cut an angled cut right where his head meets his neck because I wanted to keep that sparkle. Now I'm just feeding some jute twine through a couple of jingle bells, and that's what I'm going to use to start embellishing him. I'm just going to have them hanging down from his neck. I'm going to use some of this lamb's ear to make it look like he has a shawl, and it turns out really cute. I'm just going to use hot glue to put them down. I'm also adding a few little pine pieces. I take these little pieces of garland and trim them down so they look a little bit more high end and not quite so fluffy. And I'm going to just add a couple of them right on top of the lamb's ears. For a little pop of color, I'm just going to add a few of these little red pip berries. Today I've got some super easy Christmas projects for you, and this first one is using some of these wood planks. Now mine I got at Dollarama, but I do know that they're available also at the Dollar Tree, and this red truck free printable. I will have this listed down in my description box. It comes from Pixabay, which is all free images. So if you've never looked at Pixabay before, you've got to go, because there's a ton of stuff there that's absolutely free. You don't even have to join. I'm just using my paper trimmer to trim it down a little bit so I can figure out how many of the little wood pieces I'm going to need. With the size of the picture that I want to use, I've decided that 3 of these wood pieces will be sufficient. I do want to leave a little bit of space in between to make it look like it's on a pallet. I've figured out the spacing, and now I'm going to use 3 of these large popsicle sticks and hot glue them on to hold the pallet together. Since this is raw wood, I'm going to be using the DIY chalk paint recipe that I have down in my description box. And I'm just going to be going about an inch or 2 inches in from each edge, because I'm going to be putting the picture on top, so I don't need to paint the whole thing. The idea for this little palette is to make it stand up. So I'm using 5 of these tumbling tower blocks, and I'm going to glue them together. I started using hot glue, but then I didn't like that there was a little bit of a gap in between, and sometimes the hot glue just doesn't glue straight. So I decided to switch over to my WeldBond glue. I'm just using a paintbrush to apply the glue, just to make sure I don't get too much excess on it, and then I'll glue all 5 pieces together. I'll also need another set of 5, which I'll do too, and then within 15 to 20 minutes this glue will set up and I'll be able to move on to the next step. That's why I love WeldBond glue. It's a permanent hold, but it doesn't take long for it to get set up and let you continue with your craft. What I have to do now with the paper is measure to make sure I cut in the right spot. The easiest way to do this is just use your finger and make a crease where that little plank ends, and that's going to give me a line where I need to cut. I'm going to use Mod Podge to glue the paper onto the wood, and just a brush to apply the Mod Podge. So I'm trying a new technique with the paper. I'm just using a little bit of water in a spritz bottle, and I'm putting it on the back and then placing it down. This is something that I've seen other YouTubers do, and it's supposed to prevent bubbles in the paper. I'll let you know how it turns out. One thing I did notice as I was working with this is that I was able to easily lift the paper off and reposition it, which is something that usually you can't do when you're working with Mod Podge. It's usually pretty tricky to get that paper lifted up again. I'll just repeat that process for the next 2 pieces of paper. I'm going to give the whole front of the piece a coat of Mod Podge, working out any bubbles that might be there with the brush and being really careful not to rip anything. Whenever I'm using these little tower blocks, I like to paint them with a dark color. So for this project, I'm going to do black. The reason I do that is so you can't see the joints. If you just stain them or whitewash them or do something else with them, it does look nice because they are wood and they're raw wood, so you could do them any color. But I don't like the fact that you can see that they're little pieces stuck together. So this makes it look a little bit more high-end and professional. Now it's time to give the picture a little bit of distressing. So I've got my dry brush and some black chalk paint, and I'm just going to go around the edges and then up and down and side to side and just distress it however I want it to be. If you notice on the planks, I've got the picture put up a little bit higher to leave more space down at the bottom. I wanted the white frame around the picture to be the same width. So once I glue on those blocks, you'll still see the same amount of white peeking out underneath the picture. Using hot glue, I'm going to glue on the sign to the back side first, and then I'll put the other piece of the tumbling tower blocks on top. Being a crafter, I save everything. This is a lid from a canister that I redid last year. I'm going to use some crud cutter and just clean it up really good before I start painting it. It's already got this little lip on the inside, so I thought that would be a perfect little frame. I'm going to give the inside square a couple of coats of DIY chalk paint. I have this stencil of a Christmas tree, and I thought I'm going to do something a little different. I didn't want this Christmas tree to be a solid black, so I'm just going to tape it down, and what I'm going to do is dry brush it. The technique I use is to dip my brush into a little bit of paint and then dab off as much excess as I need, usually quite a bit. I usually start on the lighter side and then I add more paint as I need. What I'm doing is just going back and forth, making sure that I hold the edges of the stencil down nice and tight so my brush doesn't go underneath and bleed through. This is turning out amazing. I love the texture of it. I love how it looks. It's getting some of the lines from the white paint underneath, and it turns out amazing. For a finishing touch, I'm just taking my dry brush and going all the way around the edges, a little bit extra in the corners to make it look more distressed and worn. The second little mini sign that I'm going to make is just using this little piece of scrap wood. I'm just going to give the top of it a couple of coats of the white paint. I have this reindeer printout that I used on a different project. It's still got the pencil marks on the back, which is how I transferred it before, and I'm going to do the same thing now. So I'll just use my pen and trace it out really nice and firm so I get that pencil mark on the white paint. Using my black oil-based Craft Smart paint pen, I'm going to fill in the reindeer, but I'm going to skip his antlers. When I'm coloring, I always like to do an outline first and then fill in after. I thought I would add a little bit of Christmas cheer for this reindeer, so I'm using some of this Deco Art Chalky Finish paint in the color Romance, and I'm also going to mix a little bit of black in there just to get a nice deeper red color. Using a fine tip artist paintbrush, I'm going to just fill in the antlers. To make the reindeer look a little bit more distressed, I'm just going to take a tiny little dry brush and do some stippling, so some pouncing up and down, just to give it a little bit more of a worn look. This first project is using an existing wood crate that I made over for the fall and just adding some Christmas trees to the other side. I want this crate to work double duty. I'm taking a makeup sponge and some white chalk paint, and I'm just going to go ahead and paint on these Christmas trees. I'll have the link to the video where I made over the crate itself down in my description box. Next, I'm just going to make the trunks black, and I'm just going to use my paintbrush with some black chalk paint and just pounce it in. To make the trees look a little bit more distressed, I'm just taking some sandpaper and I'm going to go lightly across them and just bring out some of the wood color underneath. This last project is probably my favorite because I'm so into Farmhouse Rustic with simple lines and colors. I got this little box for $1.50 at the thrift store, and because it has a little bit of a shine to it, I'm just taking some coarse grit sandpaper and roughing it up to get some of that shine gone. I'm going to start out by giving this one coat of black chalk paint, and I'm doing this for a couple of reasons. The first is I don't want any of the color or the stain to bleed through, and I'm going to be painting this white. So if I just go with the white paint on top, there might be some of the varnish coming through and it might end up turning my paint yellow. I don't want that to happen. Secondly, when I go to distress this piece, I'll have some black showing through as well as some of the wood. So it gives it a little bit more texture and color, and it just looks really rustic. I'm going to give it 2 coats of white chalk paint, and you can see here with the black I've gone down the inside partially because I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to be putting in this yet, so I just don't want to be able to see any of the wood inside. Now it's time to distress. I'm going to use some coarse grit sandpaper, and I'm just going to use it very gently because I want to bring out some of that black paint and some of the wood. If I go too rough on it, it's going to go right down to the bare wood right away, and then I won't be able to see any of the black. I've decided to distress the panels as well, and instead of using sandpaper, I'm using a screwdriver. The reason I'm doing this is when I use sandpaper to get down as far as I want to get down, I end up scratching a lot of the paint around the area as well, because chalk paint is fairly thick, and when you do 2 coats of it, it takes a while for you to sand down to that either bare wood or just that first layer of paint, which would be the black. So this is something that I do every once in a while, and I like the look of it. I thought it would look really neat on this project. Now I'm just taking my pencil and I'm going to write out the lettering that I want to have on here. It's going to say, "Oh, Christmas Tree." And I'm just doing it freehand because these are really tiny letters and I just don't want to be bothered with stencils at this point. I'm using my Fine Point Craft Smart paint pen, and I'm just going to go over the letters and draw them in. For the word Christmas, I'm going to do a capitalized font, and it's going to be freehand again, kind of redone-ish, but not really. And when I do this, I like to start at the end of the word. So I'm going to start with the S and work my way back, so I make sure that I have enough space for all of my letters. I also went over the letters one more time to make them a little bit thicker. I added some white dry brushing onto the letters to distress them a little bit more. So I finally decided what I was going to put in here, and of course you probably figured that out because I put down the words, "Oh, Christmas Tree." So what I'm doing now is measuring the dimensions of the hole in the box. I need to be able to put something in there that's going to prop up the Christmas tree that I'm putting in there. So this is a leftover piece of sign from the Dollar Tree. This was a pumpkin. And I'm just going to use that to mark off the dimensions of the piece of wood that I need for the very top. I've traced it out, and I'm just using my utility knife to score the cardboard or the wood or the press board, whatever this stuff is called. And then I'll be able to snap it and clean it up. Right now, I don't seem to have any fluorofoam or styrofoam, and I don't want to fill up this wood box with all sorts of stuff like rocks or anything. It's just going to be too heavy. So I decided to just cut out my own little cardboard box that I'm going to glue together that will fit right inside the wood box. This has just the right dimensions, and I'll be able to put the piece of wood right on top of this cardboard box. But first, I've got to attach it to the tree. I found this little stump in my stash, and I thought that would be the perfect trunk for this tree. I just need to drill a hole in it so I'll have somewhere to stick the tree. After the holidays last year, there was a ton of clearance stuff, and I found this huge bottle brush tree for, I think it was around $5 at Pier 1. So I went ahead and grabbed this one, and I thought it would be the perfect size for this wooden box. I'm just adding some hot glue and then pushing the wire right into the stump. I'm also drilling a hole into that little piece of wood that's going to be on top of the box, And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to put a screw in from the bottom and screw that into the bottom of the wood stump so everything stays together. So I just took a screw and attached everything together. Putting some hot glue to the bottom of the little cardboard box, I'm going to glue that down into the wood box. Then adding some hot glue onto the cardboard box, I'll be able to push the wood part of the tree right inside. To finish this whole tree and box off and make it look more high-end and professional, I'm just going to glue in some moss. The second Trash to Treasure project is using these corks. I'm going to cut them in half using this little junior hacksaw. It's a really fun tool. It's super sharp. And I'm just using some pliers to hold the cork in place because they're just a little bit wiggly and I don't want to get my hands too close to that blade. When you're using corks, you're going to want to make sure that you soak them in some water for at least 10 minutes. I did mine actually for a couple of hours and then I drained out the water, but I kept them covered in a plastic container, as you can see here, and I put the lid on it, and that keeps them nice and moist, prevents them from crumbling and breaking as you're working with them. Next, I'm cutting out a little piece of wood from this garden stake, and I'm using my Mitre shears. This is a new purchase for me. I love these. They're so handy, and you just have to squeeze it and it just pops off. Super sharp, and you can do all sorts of different angles with that. I will have a link for that down in my description box. I'm just going to hot glue that little piece of wood to the front of this birdhouse, and it will become the door. I'm going to start hot gluing the half corks onto the side, back, and front of the birdhouse, and this will create the effect of a log cabin. Now, these corks do have different writing and dates on them and things like that, but I think it's going to add to the character of this piece. I'll be using those miter shears again to make some smaller cuts to fit the corks all around the door and at the peak of the roof. The log cabin portion is finished, but now it needs a roof. I'm using some large popsicle sticks, and I've used the miter shears just to cut them in different lengths because I want this to look like shingles on a roof. I'm going to use hot glue to attach them and go all the way up to the peak. The roof is almost complete. I just need to add a couple of longer strips to cover up the very top. For the trim pieces on the door, I used a large popsicle stick. I cut it in 3 pieces lengthwise and then measured out how tall I needed these side pieces, and then I'll add 3 smaller pieces horizontally in the middle. I'm taking some black and brown acrylic paint and a little bit of water to water it down a bit to create somewhat of a painted stain for the roof. So I'm just going to mix these colors together until I get a really nice dark brown, and then I'll cover the whole roof with it, including the edges and underneath. Using a red oil-based paint pen, I'm going to give the door a pop of Christmas color. To give it more of an aged and weathered look, I'm going to take the paintbrush that still has a little bit of paint on it from the roof and go over the door. And finally, no log cabin would be complete without a chimney. So I've taken a cork and I've cut it on an angle to fit the roof, and I'm just going to hot glue that in place. This will be another perfect addition to my tiered tray decor items. Check out this beautiful winter scene. Can you believe it came from a Dollar Tree shopping bag? I'm going to use this and I'm going to cover a pallet. So I'm just going to start trimming it down to the size I need. I've got the pallet right here. This was something from the fall that I'm repurposing to make for the Christmas season. Now I'm just going to lay it out on my palette and make sure that I get the top line. I'm just going to crease it with my fingers and then trim that as well. I want the slats to show on this palette sign, but I also don't want to lose any of that design in between. So what I'm doing is taking my pencil and I'm marking the line where I need it to be. Then I'm just going to trim off just that one line. Then I'm going to be able to take the image, place it onto the next piece of palette, and then do the same thing, trim off the end, and then I don't lose any of the design. What I'm going to do is just pour a little bit of Mod Podge onto the palette. I want to be able to put a really nice coat on here, but not too thick. So I'm going to spread it out using one of my chip brushes, and that's just going to get me more of an even coverage, but not too thick. Once I'm done that, I'm going to simply place the first piece of the design of the bag right on top of the palette and smooth it out. I'm going to trim off any of the excess bag just using my craft knife and being very careful not to pull too hard because I want to make sure that I don't rip the bag in the front. So I'm using a lot of pressure and I'm going really slow. To make the sign look a little bit aged, I'm going to very gently go with my sanding sponge here, and I'm just going to pull down, and that will just give my edges of the bag more of a roughed texture. I'm also going to give the corners a little bit more so it looks like they're worn down. To embellish the reindeer, I'm going to take a couple of these Greenery picks and just trim them down to make them a little bit smaller. The fluffiness is good for some projects, but not for this one. Each of my reindeer are going to get a little greenery collar, some jingle bells, and a couple of red pip berries to finish it off. I think this sign turned out absolutely adorable, and it will make a wonderful accompaniment to my Christmas decor this year. For this second project, I'm also using the water slide decals, and I've printed out a whole bunch of trees in a row. My idea is to have them on this white mug. So what I'm going to do is just cut them out. I don't need too much of the stems, so I'm going to just cut the bottom off and then go around the trees with my detail scissors. I've cut my trees into sections and now I'm putting them into some really nice warm water. You don't want it to be hot, but you want it to be really warm. And I'm holding them down until they don't curl anymore. I'm going to leave them in the water for about 45 to 60 seconds. Any longer than that, and you risk the decal lifting off from the paper, which doesn't give you much control. I'm ready to apply it to the mug, and what I'm going to do again is just push it off a little bit from the paper and then add that decal right onto my mug. I'm going to hold my finger on the decal portion and slide the paper out. It's that simple. Then you're just gently going to press it down where you need it to be. The water on the bottom of the mug where I've prepped, just like I did my enamel jug, is going to give me the ability to just slide it around and position it the way I need it to be. So go ahead and try this technique. The links for all of the Hippo products are going to be down in my description box. They're really inexpensive products to use, but you get such beautiful high-end results. I'm going to continue this process with these Christmas trees until I've covered the whole bottom of the mug. I wanted to have a pair of little mugs, so I printed off some pine cones, and I'm going to do the same thing, just prepping my surface with a little bit of water. But I found something out. I have these smaller decals that I'm using here, and I was able to pull off the paper right away and then just take the decal itself and place it where I needed it to be. It was a really fun surprise that I came across. And so make sure that when you're working with these, if you want to just take it off the paper itself and go ahead and place it on just like I'm doing here, by all means, go right ahead and do that. Whatever works best for you. Again, using a soft tissue just to dab and push the water out from underneath. Just be really careful with this part. You don't want to tear the decal. I love how these turned out. You're going to have to let me know if you like them too. So I have a whole bunch of these Christmas tree forms left over. They're wood. They were from Michael's. And I got the idea to create some angels out of them. So I'm going to be trimming off two of the branch areas, and then I'm going to cut it all the way across, round out the corners, and I end up with the body of an angel. And I think this is absolutely adorable. These wood pieces were thin enough that I could just use my utility knife and make sure that could score it a few times and then take my needle nose pliers and just give it a snap. And that was just really helpful in getting the pieces off. I'm just going to use some hot glue to glue these two pieces together. To fill in the gaps on the sides, I'm just using some hot glue and I'm taking one of these Dollar Tree scoring tools and just kind of pressing the glue into the creases. And that's just a real simple way of being able to fill things up. You can also use some spackling or some dry decks spackle that I'm going to be using shortly, but I just thought this might be another way that is a little bit faster and easier to do. My angel needed a neck, so I'm taking this half-inch dowel and I'm just cutting it with my miter shears just to get a little neck piece. I'm going to hot glue that on the top of the body and then I'll attach her head. This is a doll head that I picked up at Michael's in a bag. I think there were 5 or 6. This is the last one I have left, and it's the perfect head for my angel. I glued on 2 little wood beads for her hands. And of course, an angel needs wings. So I'm taking these wood stars that I have, got a bunch of them as well. And I thought I'm going to use what I have. I'm just going to be tracing out this original one that I made already. And I'm going to then show you how I created an angel wing out of this star. So I'm just going to trim off the excess points that I don't need and then round off the top. I sanded down the edges to make everything smooth, and now I'm just going to hot glue the wings onto the back of the angel. I'm using a pencil to mark where I want them to be. I'm using some of the dry deck spackling to create some texture on the wings. I wanted them to look kind of fluffy, but I didn't want to use any fabric or anything. I wanted this still to be quite rustic. I'm putting it on with the consistency probably of a thin icing, and then I'll just use the popsicle stick to add more texture. I also added some texture just to the bottom portion of her skirt. So I'm putting on the spackling again, just like some icing. And then I'm going to just take my popsicle stick and create some lines that'll just show up when I distress her later. I'm going to paint all of the body and the wings with the baking soda mixture that I created for the snowman. This is just going to add some extra texture. I've let it dry completely and now I'm going to do some distressing. This is some silver acrylic paint and I'm just very gently going to dry brush her wings and the bottom of her skirt, just where I put the spackling, and added the texture. And this is just going to bring out a lot of the details on the wings and her skirt. I'm going to glue 2 tumbling tower blocks, one to the front and one to the back, and that's going to help her stand up a lot better. I'm going to glue the angel onto this rustic piece of wood slice. It has live edge on either sides. Then I'm going to add a bunch of bottle brush trees and some pine cones and a couple of the Dollar Tree white and sparkly trees. And I think this turned out absolutely beautiful. Charlene, if you're watching and you'd like me to send you this beautiful rustic angel, I would be happy to do so. I grabbed these salt and pepper shakers at my local thrift store for $3.99 for the pair, and I thought they were the perfect shape and size for little snowmen. The first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and spray them with some Rust-Oleum Clear Matte. That's going to help my chalk paint stick lots better to this shiny surface. Next, they're going to get 2 coats of black chalk paint because all of this design on it is fairly dark in color and I don't want to have to do a million coats of white. So I'm just going to go over it very lightly with the black, give it a couple of coats, lighter coats, and make sure that I don't plug up any of those holes at the top where the spices need to come out. This exact idea came from a subscriber. Her name is Debbie. She thought it would be fun to create some salt and pepper snowman because that would work for Christmas, but then would also take you through the winter season. So, Debbie, if you're watching, these are for you. Let me know if you want me to send them to you when they're done. I made sure that these were really dry before I started with the white, but you can see that I'm getting a really nice coverage with the white. 2 thin coats, and then I'm going to go over it with a third in the opposite direction to fill in any of the bumps and brush strokes so it's a little bit less noticeable. To get the really good coverage that I just mentioned, I'm changing the direction of my painting. The first 2 coats were horizontally across, and now I'm going up and down. And this is just going to give me superior coverage, and it's what I've been doing for a really long time, and I really love this technique. So if you want to make sure you're covering something really well with your paint, change the direction of your brush strokes and that will fill in all of the little nooks and crannies and give you a nice smooth surface. Once the white is completely dry, I'm now going to give it another coat of the Rust-Oleum Matte Clear because I want to do some painting on it and I don't want anything to run. So I just want to make sure these are really sealed well so they can be wiped down with a damp cloth and cleaned since they're going to be handled a little bit more often than most of my projects. I'm using an oil-based Craft Smart black paint pen to add all of the cute little embellishments for the snowman. So first I'm going to be adding some eyes. I'm just kind of making oval shapes and filling them in. This is just an extra fine tip Sharpie pen. I'm just creating some extra little round lines around the outside of the eyes just to make them have more character. With a white chalk marker, I'm just adding a little dot to make the eyes sparkle. With a tiny, tiny little paintbrush, I'm going to create a little carrot nose. I'm using my favorite orange color, which is called Honey Brown. It's from Americana, and it's a really sort of rusty orange color, nothing too bright. So I'm just going to start making a rounded area and then gently get it into a point. You can see what I'm doing here. It's a carrot. Going back to the Sharpie, it's time for the little mouth. So I'm just going to draw those 2 little arcs that you see that will be the little cheeks. And then I'll put a cute little smile on him, make it a little bit wider towards the bottom, and then fill it in. And I think this little face is the most adorable thing I've made in a really long time. He's super cute. I created a his and hers set. So for the little girl, I just drew on a little checkered scarf. And now for the little boy, I'm going to give him a nice black bow tie. I also added some eyelashes to the little girl. I also gave them some stick arms, as you can see here, and some buttons down the front with a little bit of the chalk paint to accent them. I think these little guys turned out so adorable. And Debbie, if you're watching, I hope you love them too. For this project, I'm going to use these Christmas trees that are a garland from the Dollar Tree, but I'm going to use them in a different way. The first thing I'm going to do is add some of my Dry Dex spackling and fill in the holes at the top. Once the spackling was dry, I just sanded it off just a little bit to make it nice and smooth. And now I'm just using a stain that I created just using burnt umber acrylic paint and some water. And I've got that in a little jar here. I'm going to stain both the front and the back of the trees. And I'm going to go up a little bit farther as you see me doing here because I'm going to be needing to create that bottom portion of the star with another color. For the star at the top, I want to keep it fairly neutral, so I'm using this acrylic paint called Warm White, and I'm going to cover up the star on both sides, just like I did with the stain, and then for the bottom 2 points of the star, I'm going to go ahead and just create a little imaginary line like the top of the tree, just in a triangle shape, as you see me doing here. I'll do the same on all 5 of the trees. These little trees are going to turn into my little labels for my charcuterie board, and I'm going to just take my box cutter and just cut out a little slit at the top of these tiny little corks. These were also from the thrift store. Of course, I'm being very careful and going very slow, and then I'm just going to use the tip of the knife and just carve out the little bits that I don't need. Then I'll be able to just use a little bead of hot glue and push the trunk of the tree right into the cork. Using some of these chalk labels with the little clothespin attached, I'm going to just pull off the clothespin because I don't need that. And then I'm just going to clean it up with my snips and get all of the extra wood off. Then I'm going to hot glue each of these labels onto the Christmas trees. Even though these labels say they are chalkboard labels, they are really horrible. I seasoned the surface with the chalk like you see me doing here, and then I tried to write something on with my marker. It totally bled all over the place, so I wasn't able to do that. What I ended up doing was repainting all of these black and then using my Cricut and white removable vinyl, and I cut out all sorts of little labels for these trees. Because I used removable vinyl, I'll be able to just peel those off and then create some new ones for the next party I have. I hope you enjoyed this mega video and got some inspiration to get started with your crafting for Christmas. Please make sure you hit that thumbs up, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and don't forget about the notification bell. You don't want to miss out on anything else I have to share. Bye for now.